My name is Connie, and I am 68 years old. For the past 5 years since my husband Richard passed, my world has slowly contracted to the quiet rhythms of my own home. So when my son David called to invite me to a fancy dinner at the Oak Room, just the four of us, him, his wife Heather, her mother Gloria, and me, a little spark of that old excitement flickered back to life. I chose my dress carefully, the blue one Richard always liked. I made a small jar of my lemon marmalade for David and wrapped a classic storybook for my grandson Liam gifts sitting by my purse. As I drove downtown, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe this dinner could be a fresh start. But as I sat down smoothing my dress, I had no idea that the next 2 hours would unravel a lifetime of quiet sacrifices. Before I share how a simple dinner became the line I could no longer cross, I am curious about where you are listening from. Is it during your own quiet evening or maybe on a break from a busy day? Please take a moment to let me know in the comments below. And if you have ever felt that subtle shift where family stops feeling like a refuge, consider subscribing. My story, I promise, is just beginning. The Oak Room was all soft lighting and white tablecloths. I saw them before they saw me. David, my boy now, a man of 42 with a receding hairline, looking stiff in his button-down shirt. Next to him, Heather. She was always polished, her blonde hair in a sharp bob, laughing at something. And beside her, a woman with the same laugh, just louder. Gloria, Heather's mother. They looked like a closed circle, a unit of 3. David was the odd piece trying to fit. When I approached, the circle broke open. Heather's smile was quick, bright, and it did not reach her eyes. Connie, you found it. Gloria looked me up and down, her own smile widening. Well, don't you look sweet? I love a classic look. The way she said classic made it sound like old-fashioned. David stood and gave me a brief, awkward hug. Hi, Mom. Glad you could make it. We ordered drinks. Gloria immediately launched into a story about her recent cruise, her hands waving, her voice carrying. And the martinis, honey, they just kept coming. Not like these little things. She gestured dismissively at the wine list. I tried to catch David's eye to share a silent moment, but he was staring at his water glass, rotating it slowly. I asked about Liam. Heather answered for David. He's fantastic, thriving at his new preschool. It's very progressive, very focused on social-emotional learning. She said it like a challenge, as if I might argue for a school focused on, say, ABCs. That sounds wonderful, I said, my voice sounding small. I brought him a book. Heather glanced at the wrapped gift I'd placed on the empty chair beside me. How thoughtful. Though we're really trying to limit screen time and passive entertainment, it was a book, a physical book. I just nodded. The appetizers arrived. Gloria was telling another story, this one about a disastrous date with a man who collected ceramic owls. Heather laughed, a sharp tinkling sound. I offered a small smile. Gloria pointed a fork at me. You're so quiet, Connie Cat got your tongue. Or are you just taking it all in? She winked at David. Your mom's a good listener. I'll give her that. David finally spoke. Mom's always been a good listener. It was meant to be kind, but it just cemented my role in that moment. The audience, not a participant. The first real pinch of discomfort settled in my chest. This was not the warm gathering I had pictured in my car. This felt like I was a guest on a stage where I did not know my lines. The main courses came. My salmon looked beautiful, but my appetite was fading. The conversation pivoted, as it often did with Heather, to real estate. They were looking at houses again, something bigger in a better school district. The market is just brutal. Heather sighed, sipping her Chardonnay. But we have to think of Liam's future. We need at least a 15% down payment to be competitive. Gloria nodded sagely. It's an investment. You can't be sentimental about money. Then she looked directly at me. What about you, Connie? That house of yours must have shot up in value, all those years in one place. It was not a question born of curiosity. It was a probe. I carefully set my fork down. The house is paid for. Richard saw to that. Its value is that it's my home. My tone was gentle but firm. Gloria chuckled. Sentimental value. Cute. But money in the bank is real value. Heather jumped in, her voice smooth. Mom's just being practical. It's a different generation, Connie. You were raised to save. We're raised to invest, to leverage assets. She made my lifetime of careful saving sound like a quaint, foolish hobby. Then Gloria launched into what she called parenting war stories. She talked about Heather's teenage years with a kind of boastful horror. I just threw my hands up. "What are you going to do? Kids will be kids." She laughed. Then she turned to me. "Bet you were one of those by-the-book moms, huh? Scheduled feedings, early bedtimes." I had been. It gave our home a peaceful rhythm. Structure provided comfort, I said simply. Heather could not let it lie. She leaned forward, her expression one of polite condescension. "See, all the data now shows that rigid structure can actually stifle a child's creativity and self-regulation. We're following more of an attachment child-led model with Liam." She said it like she was explaining a scientific theorem to someone who still believed the earth was flat. David was cutting his steak with intense concentration, as if the perfect slice of meat was the most important thing in the world. The insult was not in her words, but in the dismissal behind them. My motherhood, the heart of my life for decades, was being framed as outdated, even harmful. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I took a sip of water. "Liam seems like a happy boy," I managed to say. "He is," David said quickly, finally looking up. "He's great." But he did not say, "You did a good job with me, Mom." The silence that followed was louder than Gloria's laugh had ever been. I excused myself to go to the restroom, needing a moment to breathe, to gather the pieces of myself that were starting to feel scattered. The hallway to the restrooms was cool and quiet, a relief from the table's oppressive energy. As I reached for the door to the ladies' room, I heard Heather's voice from around the corner, low and sharp. She must have followed me. "Just keep her calm, David. We're almost through it. Do not bring up the down payment again. You saw her face. We'll talk about it later when she's softer." I froze my hand on the door handle. David's mumbled response was too low to hear. Then Heather again. "It's one dinner. Smile and nod. For Liam's future." I pushed the door open and went inside, leaning against the sink, looking at my reflection in the ornate mirror. My cheeks were flushed. My eyes looked tired. For Liam's future. My grandson's face was being used as a shield, a justification. I splashed cold water on my wrists, the way my own mother taught me to do when upset. When I returned to the table, they were huddled over Gloria's phone, watching a video, laughing together. They did not notice me standing there for a good 10 seconds. When David finally looked up, he had the decency to look guilty. "Oh, Mom, sorry. Gloria just showed us this hilarious cat video." We moved on to dessert and coffee. The sugar seemed to amp up Gloria's energy. She started telling stories about her single life stories that felt too personal, too detailed for a dinner table. Stories about dating apps and bad kisses and men with peculiar habits. I sat very still, stirring my decaf, wishing I could become part of the wallpaper. My discomfort must have been plain. Gloria paused. Her story tilted her head at me. "Oh, honey, don't look so shocked. You've been a widow too long. You need to get back out there. Live a little. I could set you up a profile. We could write, 'Sweet retired teacher seeks gentleman for early bird specials and quiet companionship.'" She threw her head back and laughed. Heather smirked, covering her mouth with her napkin. Something inside me, a thread of patience I had been clinging to, snapped. I placed my spoon down on the saucer. It made a clear, ringing sound. "I am quite content with my life, Gloria," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Richard gave me enough memories to last a lifetime." The table went quiet. Heather's smirk vanished. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "See, that's what I mean, Connie," she said, her voice sugary. "Clinging to the past. It isn't healthy. It leaves no room for new experiences, new people." She gestured between herself, David, and Gloria, like the family that's actually here now. The air left my lungs. It was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. It erased Richard. It erased my history. It told me I was not part of their now. David opened his mouth, closed it, and said nothing. His silence in that moment was a betrayal so profound, I felt it physically, a cold ache in the center of my chest. Gloria, sensing the wound was open, poured salt. She patted Heather's hand. "She just doesn't get our humor, sweetie. Some people are just serious." She turned her bright, mocking eyes back to me. "Lighten up, Connie. It's all in good fun. Can't you take a joke?" The condescension was a palpable thing, a third entity at the table. I looked at my son. His face was a mask of miserable conflict. He wanted to be anywhere but here, but he lacked the courage to be anywhere else. He was waiting for me to absorb it, to smooth it over, to be the bigger person like I always had. For peace. For his peace. Heather watched this silent exchange between her husband and me. She saw his weakness and my pain, and in that moment she decided to go for the kill. She leaned back in her chair, a queen on her throne, and delivered the line she must have been rehearsing in her head all night. She looked right at me, her voice clear and cold. "She's right, you know. If you don't like my mom's jokes, you know what you can do." She paused, letting the tension stretch. "If you don't like my mom's jokes, pay the bill and leave." Time stopped. The clatter of plates, the murmur of other diners, it all faded into a dull roar. I saw David's eyes widen in shock. I saw Gloria's triumphant, barely suppressed smile. I saw Heather's expression one of pure, unadulterated challenge. She had drawn a line in the sand of the white tablecloth. She was evicting me from the family dinner from their circle and charging me for the privilege. This was not an emotional outburst. It was a calculated power play. And in that suspended, silent second, as the shock and humiliation crested inside me, something else rose to meet it. A calm so deep and so absolute, it felt like diving into a still, cold lake after being in a burning house. The decision was instant, crystal clear, and it came from a place within me I had forgotten existed. I smiled. It was not a forced smile. It was a genuine, peaceful smile of sudden, absolute clarity. The shock on their faces was almost comical. They had expected tears or anger or stuttered apologies. They had not expected serene acceptance. "You know what, Heather," I said, my voice calm and pleasant, as if she had just suggested a lovely after-dinner stroll. "That is an excellent idea." I raised my hand slightly and caught the eye of our server, a young man who had been hovering discreetly. "Excuse me, could I have the check, please? The complete check for everything at this table." David made a choked sound. "Mom, no, stop, wait, just—" He was floundering. I looked at him. My son, and I felt a profound sorrow, but it was distant now behind the glass wall of my resolve. "It is quite all right, David," I said, my tone final. "Your wife has made her terms very clear. I am simply agreeing to them." I reached for my purse, a simple leather clutch Richard had given me for our 30th anniversary. I opened it and took out my wallet. Inside was a single credit card, the one I used for emergencies or major purchases. I had saved diligently to keep its balance at 0. This, I thought, is a major emergency. The emergency of my own dignity. The server returned with the leather folio. He placed it gently in front of me with a quiet, "Whenever you're ready, ma'am." The silence at our table was so heavy I could feel it pressing on my skin. Gloria's smirk was gone, replaced by confusion. Heather's confident mask had slipped, revealing uncertainty underneath. She had not thought I would call her bluff. No one moved as I opened the folio. I did not flinch at the total. It was a staggering number, more than I spent on groceries in a month. I inserted my card, handed the folio back to the server, and waited. The only sound was the soft click of David's knife against his plate. When the server returned, I signed the slip, added a generous tip for his excellent and patient service, and placed the pen down with a quiet finality. I stood up. I gathered my coat from the back of my chair. I slid my arms into it, taking my time. I picked up my purse and the little wrapped gift for Liam. I looked at the three of them frozen in their seats. I saved my gaze for Heather last. "Thank you for the clarity, Heather," I said, my voice still eerily calm. "I hope the dinner was worth it." I turned to go, then paused. I turned back. From my purse, I took the small sealed envelope I had brought. It contained a card for Liam and a check, a generous check I had written to help with something special for him. I placed it on the table in front of David's dessert plate. "This was for Liam," I said softly. "But I think his parents need to learn the value of things and people first." Then I turned and I walked. I did not look back. I walked past the other tables through the hushed lobby and out into the cool night air. I did not run. I walked with my shoulders back and my head held high, a woman who had just bought back her self-respect at a very specific, non-negotiable price. The cold air hit my face as the heavy restaurant door closed behind me, sealing off the world I had just left. My hands were steady as I fumbled for my car keys. I unlocked the door, slid inside, and closed myself into the familiar silent space of my sedan. Then, and only then, did the trembling start. It began in my hands, a fine vibration, then traveled up my arms and into my core. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and let out a long, shuddering breath that was part sob, part laugh. I was not crying from sadness. I was crying from the sheer, overwhelming force of the adrenaline leaving my body. I had done it. I had actually done it. I sat there in the dark parking lot for a long time, just breathing, feeling the solid reality of the steering wheel under my palms, listening to the faint sound of my own heart slowing down. My phone and my purse on the passenger seat began to buzz. Then it rang. David's name flashed on the screen. I watched it ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again. Heather this time. I pressed the side button to silence it. The buzzing continued, text messages lighting up the screen. I could not look. I started the car and drove home, the familiar streets passing in a blur. The house was dark and quiet when I entered. I did not turn on the main lights. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and made a cup of chamomile tea with the mechanical movements of a robot. I carried it to the sunroom, sat in my favorite armchair by the window, and stared out at the moonlit shapes of my backyard garden. The phone buzzed again on the side table. A text preview lit up the screen. "David, Mom, please." That got out of hand. "Let's talk. Let's talk." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, she was wrong. Just the same old plea to smooth things over to paper the cracks so he would not have to face the uncomfortable fracture between his wife and his mother. The ache for my son was a deep old bruise, but the new clear space in my mind was stronger. I picked up the phone. I did not read the other messages. I typed out a reply to David, my thumbs moving slowly, deliberately. "I need space, David. What happened was unacceptable. Do not contact me unless it is to offer a genuine apology from both you and Heather for the deliberate cruelty. My relationship with you and my grandson is now conditional on respect. I will not be financing your house or your dinners or your disrespect any longer." I read it over once, then pressed send. There was a finality to the whoosh sound it made. I placed the phone face down on the table, sipped my tea, and watched the moon. For the first time in years, the quiet of the house did not feel like loneliness. It felt like sovereignty. The next morning I woke up early. The world had not ended. The sun was rising. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my financial ledger, a sturdy notebook I had kept for 40 years. I turned to a fresh page. At the top I wrote, "New budget." For Connie. I listed my income, pension, Social Security, modest investment dividends. Then I listed my expenses. I saw with stark clarity all the little lines I had for David and Heather. Gifts, unexpected help, oversized Christmas and birthday checks. I drew a single firm line through that entire category. The money I had spent last night was a significant sum. I noted it under a new category I called Freedom Investment, non-negotiable. Seeing it written down made it real and somehow less painful. It was not a loss. It was a transfer. I had transferred funds from my bank account directly into my emotional and spiritual bank account, and the balance there felt stronger than ever. I needed to fill the space their absence would leave, not with busyness, but with substance. I remembered the flyer for the community center's watercolor class for beginners that had been on my fridge for months. I had always said I was too old, too busy, not artistic. I took the flyer down, went to my computer, and registered online. That small click felt monumental. Later that week, I went to the class. I was nervous holding my new cheap set of paints. 2 women around my age waved me over to their table. Eleanor, a former librarian with a mischievous glint in her eye, and Rosalind, a widow like me who spoke softly but with a backbone of steel. We fumbled with brushes and laughed at our muddy colors. They did not ask about my family. We talked about light, about the difficulty of painting clouds, about the best local bakery. It was easy. David's texts became less frequent, but they followed a pattern. Guilt. Liam asked for you yesterday. Deflection. Heather was stressed about work. And finally, a mild accusation. You're really going to let this come between you and your grandson. Each one hurt, but the hurt was now a clean cut, not a ragged tear. I did not respond to the manipulations. Instead, I went to the bookstore, bought a beautiful children's book about kindness, and mailed it to Liam at his home with a simple note. For my dear Liam, with all my love, Grandma. I did not send a check. I would not let my love be quantified by them anymore. I would send my love directly on my own terms. Then about a month after the dinner, I got an email alert from my bank. A scheduled transaction from your joint account with David A. Miller has failed due to insufficient funds. My breath caught. The joint account. The one we had opened when David was in college for emergencies. I had never closed it. There was still a few $1,000s in it, money I considered his, but the account was in both our names. I logged in, my heart pounding. The failed transaction was for a large, even sum, a down payment sum, a transfer attempt to a real estate title company. Heather had tried to use it. She had found this last forgotten thread tying me to them and had pulled on it hard. Sitting alone at my desk, I felt a surge of something colder than anger. It was resolve. I put on a nice sweater, drove to the bank, and asked to speak to a manager. I explained calmly that I needed to close a joint account and transfer the full remaining balance to my personal savings. There were no questions asked. 20 minutes later, it was done. I walked out of the bank into the afternoon sun, the weight of that final invisible tether gone. I felt lighter than air. I was no longer the glue. And I finally understood that the thing they were trying to hold together was not worth the pieces of myself I had been sacrificing. Time has a way of softening edges, not by blurring them, but by putting them into perspective. It has been several months now. My life looks different. The chair by my garden window is often occupied in the morning with a sketch pad and my slightly better watercolors. The smell of paint and paper is a new happy scent in my home. I have coffee every Thursday with Eleanor and Rosalind. We talk about books, our pasts, our fears about aging alone, but with laughter, with solidarity. I started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to toddlers on Tuesday mornings. Their sticky hands and wide eyes are a medicine no pharmacy could ever bottle. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop allowing them to mistreat you. It is not about revenge. It was about reclaiming my own dignity. By paying that bill and walking away, I was not buying their silence. I was purchasing my own freedom. I stopped being the glue holding their convenient, disrespectful world together. And you know what? The world did not collapse. Mine just finally began to rotate around my own axis. I think of David. I think of Liam. The love is still there, but it lives in a separate room of my heart, now a room with very strong doors. The door is unlocked, but it only opens from the outside with a key called sincere respect. They have not found that key yet. And I have discovered I am perfectly capable of living in the other well-lit rooms of my life rooms, filled with peace and my own chosen company. My story is not really about a villainous daughter-in-law. It is about a woman who finally heard her own voice after years of tuning it out for the sake of an empty chair at a family table. Now my table is smaller, but the silence around it is peaceful, and the seat across from me is reserved for self-respect. And that I have found is the most nourishing meal of all. Now I would love to hear from you. Have you ever reached a point where you had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? How did you find the strength to draw your own line? Please share your thoughts or your own stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would give it a like. It helps others find these conversations. And if you would like to join me for more stories about finding strength later in life, please consider subscribing and sharing this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening and for being part of this community. Remember, it is never too late to reclaim your seat at your own table. Wishing you peace and the courage to define your own worth. Goodbye for now.